Hello and welcome. I'm Seth Boustead, and I'm excited to be the lecturer for the Grant Park Music Festival's 2021 season. Also excited to talk about this fantastic program that opens up with a piece by Anna Clyne called Sound and Fury. You may recognize that name, as Anna Clyne was the composer in residence with the Chicago Symphony for many years. This work was composed for the Scottish Chamber Symphony, and it's a fantastic opener. And then we move to the Nicolai Mass by Haydn, which will showcase the Grant Park Music Festival chorus under Christopher Bell. This piece isn't performed so often, but it's Haydn at the height of his creative powers, and there's a lot of great music in it. And then we'll conclude with Beethoven's First Symphony, his first outing as a symphonist. Of course, we all know where he goes from there. The program opens with Sound and Fury by Anna Clyne, and I do have a clip I'm very excited to play to give you a preview of this work. But let's hear from the composer first about her inspiration for this piece.
I'm delighted they're going to be performing Sound and Fury, which is a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago as part of my residency with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. And it was premiered on a concert with Haydn's 60th Symphony, Il Distrato, which is actually Haydn reimagining music from a play that he had scored. So it has a sort of theatrical reference. So my piece, Sound and Fury, actually draws inspiration from two great works of art. One is Haydn's Il Distrato, but also Shakespeare's Macbeth. In particular, the soliloquy that Macbeth expresses upon learning of his wife's death. It's a very famous soliloquy that begins tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And at the very end, he says, it is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And it's here that I take the title Sound and Fury for my piece, Sound and Fury. My process for writing this piece was actually becoming much more familiar with Il Distrato, which is a symphony in 6 movements. So whilst my piece is only in 1 movement, it does have 6 subsections that correlate to the Haydn. So what I did is I listened to it over and over, and I got a piece of paper and I jotted down rhythmic or harmonic or melodic ideas that caught my ear, just like 1 or 2 from each movement, and then I spun them out through my own lens. And an example of that is actually in his Adagio. He has a beautiful series of 4 chords that each time I heard them, I just sort of melted and I wanted to hear them more. So I just looped that as a pedal and gradually increased the orchestration, which then provides a bed of sound upon which we hear either a live actor or a pre-recorded voice reciting tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, this very impactful soliloquy. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, Haydn has a great sense of humor too. He has a moment in the Prestissimo where it's going feverishly fast and suddenly it stops, and he has them, it's like a musical joke. He has the violins retuning their instruments with these big glissandi. So I was able to incorporate those sort of big glissandi, but making them like up the octave and down the octave, really exaggerating them. So yeah, I'm delighted they're going to be playing Sound and Fury, and it was a fun opportunity to get to know Haydn's 60th Symphony and also to reconnect with Macbeth as well.
That's composer Anna Clyne talking about the inspiration for her work, Sound and Fury, which will open this concert. I love this concept of being inspired by each of the 6 movements of the Haydn and using that as inspiration for 6 different sections in the work. The piece is about 18 minutes long in a single movement, but because of this structure, it actually holds together quite well and is a very convincing piece. It opens up with a bang, strings sawing away, bassoon very, very active, lots of things happening. It's a very exciting opening, but I want to jump to the part that she's talking about, which is about 3/4 of the way into the piece, getting towards the end, and everything slows down. We hear that chord progression that she's talking about in the Haydn, now transformed by Anna Clyne, and then we hear the voice speaking text from Shakespeare's Macbeth, the Sound and Fury text that she quoted. So let's listen first to the Haydn, a little bit of the Haydn Adagio from which the inspiration came, and then we'll hear this part of Sound and Fury by Anna Clyne.
tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace.
It's interesting to hear the two side by side, isn't it? Haydn sounding very much like Haydn, using a chord progression that captured the ear of composer Anna Clyne, and then her more contemporary take on that. She really slows that chord progression down, stretches it out, and then brings in this, well, in this case, with the recording that I used, which is the Scottish Chamber Symphony, the voice is disembodied. It's coming from above. And this is happening about 13, 14 minutes into the work, give or take. And prior to that, we've only had music, and much of it is fast music. And now all of a sudden it slows down. We have this beautiful languid chord progression, and then the voice comes out speaking this intense text from Macbeth. And, well, it's really an affecting moment, quite a wonderful moment by Anna Clyne. The second piece on the program is the Nicolai Mass by Franz Joseph Haydn. Again, he did write a lot of music, and this is kind of an inspired choice in a lot of respects. It's not a piece that gets performed very often, but I think for an outdoor festival it makes a lot of sense, and of course it does showcase the chorus, which is always really nice. This is a setting of the Mass, and so the Mass is the Catholic Mass that's said on Sunday, in this case the ordinary, so it would be for a normal Sunday. And the Mass is in 6 sections, and they are the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Credo, the Sanctus, the Benedictus, and the Agnus Dei. So all 6 sections are present here. They all have fixed text that Haydn would have set, but he does have some leeway as a creator, and he decided to set this as a so-called pastoral mass, or a rural mass. And this means he uses some musical conventions that would call up the countryside, and that would really lend itself to an interpretation of this mass being a celebration of Jesus' humble beginnings, the birth in the manger. And what he does musically is he puts a lot of the movements in 3 or in 6, which for people, especially in 6/8 or in this case 6/4, conjures up ideas of the countryside, of a country dance. So actually the opening movement, the Kyrie, is in 6/4, as is the closing movement. I want to move to the Credo. There's so much great music in this piece, but the Credo for me is the kind of beating heart of this piece. In the Latin Mass, the Credo is simply the affirmation of faith. I believe. I believe in God. I believe in the Trinity. And what Haydn does with it is he starts out in G major, again, more of a dance kind of movement, very up feel, and then he goes into G minor, and it's this totally different feel, incredibly beautiful. Before, of course, nothing back at that time ever ended in minor. It was considered unnecessarily macabre, so of course he goes back into major. But I want to play the opening going into that middle section, because for me it's among the most beautiful music that Haydn wrote. Very beautiful setting of the Credo by Franz Joseph Haydn. Again, it's possible he wrote the Nicolai Mass very, very quickly. kind of dashed it off, as it were. And yet that music, to me, is just absolutely incredible. I mean, of course, this is a composer who's constantly exercising his composerly muscle. I mean, he's writing constantly, which of course really, really helps. But nonetheless, that does sound like very heartfelt music. And I do wonder, because I think that Haydn probably wrote this as a gift for his royal patron, and I do think that they had most of the time a good relationship. The program will conclude with Beethoven's First Symphony, premiered in 1800. And this is a fascinating work in so many respects. Of course, we know Beethoven 5, Beethoven 7, Beethoven 9, Beethoven 3. These are the big ones in many respects. The First Symphony is kind of Beethoven sort of paying homage to the composers that came before, Mozart and Haydn especially, but also stating that he is an equal of them, and to a certain extent starting to show where he's going to go from there. But it's almost like he needs to get this 18th century out of his system before he can move into the 19th century. In fact, shortly after the premiere of the First Symphony, he tells a friend that he will soon be embarking on a new path. And boy, does he. We think of Beethoven, of course, as the revolutionary who ushered in the Romantic era, the solitary artist who struggles against great odds and succeeds in the end. But here it's a different kind of Beethoven, though he still has that confidence, of course. In fact, again, he is saying that he wants to be thought of as an equal of Haydn and Mozart. So Beethoven knew Mozart just a teensy little bit. He studied with Haydn, but he didn't really think that Haydn took him seriously, so he broke off the studies. But he continued to pay homage to Haydn in the First Piano Sonata. Many of his early works show Haydn's influence. I think he did have great respect for Haydn. At the same time, he was impatient, and he was ready to be taken seriously and to announce his arrival as on the same plane. And so here he is when he starts this symphony, a 25-year-old kid, basically, with this grand confidence, almost a chip on his shoulder in some respects. And I find that just absolutely remarkable, that confidence. I mean, Mozart's 41st Symphony was only 12 years in the past. Haydn is still very much alive. He's cranking out his last great masterpieces in the symphonic repertoire. He is lionized across the continent as the great composer. And here's Beethoven saying, yeah, that's all well and good, but I'm going to be there too. And so the First Symphony, again, is a closing of the door to a certain extent on the 18th century and slowly starting to open the door on the 19th century. The first movement is really fascinating. Beethoven starts with a slower section, and it's tonally ambiguous. The piece is in C major, but Beethoven does a chain of cadences that don't quite resolve where they should. A lot of commentators have said that it sounds like the music is searching. It's trying to find home. When it does get there, Beethoven launches into a sprightly melody, one of his most extroverted themes, and he's hammering out C major now as if to really say, I knew where I was going all along. Let's hear the very opening, this tonally uncertain moment going into the great theme. That's Beethoven, First Symphony, a little bit of the beginning into the first great theme in the Allegro. Here again, we have Beethoven doing double duty, doffing his hat, as it were, to Mozart and Haydn at the same time as he's saying, I'm one of you. I am definitely of the same caliber. It's quite fascinating. The third movement is perhaps where Beethoven flexes his muscle the most. The third movement in a classical symphony is usually a minuet and trio. It's a dance in three. Beethoven later would write scherzos, which are very fast, and not typically dance-like. I think you'd wear yourself out if you tried to dance to one of these scherzos. So here, technically, this is not a scherzo, it's a minuet, but the tempo is very fast. We're already seeing what Beethoven will do with the third movement. Let's have a listen. A little bit of Beethoven's First Symphony, the third movement, which again is marked as a minuet, but it's so fast. It's a far cry from the courtly dance from which the minuet originally sprang, and it really points to the future of what Beethoven will do in his third movements down the road. Let's play some of the fourth movement now. This is the grand finale of Beethoven's First Symphony, and lots of Mozart and Haydn influences here. Beethoven is kind of pretty more or less content to utilize conventions from the 18th century, including the so-called Mannheim rocket, which is this upward motif pioneered by Joseph Mannheim. It was also called the Mannheim Steamroller, which the famous band is named after. At any rate, Beethoven uses this idea. It ends in this flurry of violins. This is classic Beethoven. Although he may be paying homage to the 18th century, you will never think that this is Haydn. You will always know it's Beethoven. It has the authority that Beethoven's music always has. It has that, again, heaviness is the wrong term exactly, but he's starting to push the orchestra beyond its boundaries. He's using the brass more. The whole symphony uses the winds a lot more than Mozart or Haydn ever did. He is gradually pushing the boundaries of what the orchestra can do, and we hear that in the fourth movement. Let's hear an excerpt. A little bit of Beethoven's fourth movement from the First Symphony. So much going on here. If you know your classical music, this is just fun because he's like showing his influences. There's the Mannheim rocket, there's a little bit of Haydn, there's this, there's that, all of these different wonderful 18th century musical conventions coming in a whirl amidst things that are very definitely Beethoven, that will become a big part of his original voice as he masters the symphony, and boy, does he. So that will conclude the program, Beethoven's First Symphony. It's a marvelous program from Anna Clyne in the 21st century to Joseph Haydn, this little-known piece, the Nicolai Mass, to Beethoven really flexing his muscle and moving us from one century's conventions to conventions that he will create for the next century. I'm Seth Boustead. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you at a future lecture.